Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with my good friend Joel Bellenson. And my name is Fatboy. This is a special edition of the Fatboy Show. Joel is a wonderful friend of mine that I've met a couple of years ago. Actually, I think the first time we met was it was a business meeting.
It was a lot longer than a couple of years ago.
This is 2015, I think, probably about 8 years ago. And it was a business meeting with a mutual friend that we had who was a very good person. How is he, by the way?
He's fine. He's fine. We just finished doing a giant cocoa study.
Amazing. Okay, so, and over the years, we've on occasion had the opportunity to meet and talk about things, and I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I thought now that, I'd established a radio station and now I have a studio, that some of those conversations can now be brought here for the public to enjoy, because I think in having these conversations, we're all just in a quest for truth, aren't we? Yep. We just want to ask questions, share perspectives, and see if we can find some more clarity to help explain a lot of the strange things that are happening in the world. So without hesitation, I'm just going to jump straight into it. In part 2 of this conversation, we're jumping into the issue of anti-Semitism. I'm sure in the first part of the interview, it was not lost on you what Mr. Bellenson's heritage is. He did hint at it here and there. The fact that he is of a Jewish background. What is your background specifically, ethnically?
Well, I was born in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
My parents were born in New York. Their parents came from elsewhere, came from Russia and Poland, Romania. So I'm second generation American. Mm-hmm. And our background, we even have North African in our family heritage because people orbited the Mediterranean just because Jews are always running. That's just part of our lives.
Yeah, there's over the years, the Jewish people have wandered around the world, and have since become spread around throughout the world. And obviously, in their journeys, they've met some animosity in different places that they've been to, and a lot of that animosity seems to still be there, for reasons that are hard to explain. I think partially just prejudice and perhaps equally partially certain misunderstandings between the different groups that have come into contact with the Jewish community. I don't know if it can be strictly attributable to cultural differences. Are there aspects of politics involved? Like when I say politics, I mean like ethnic politics. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for Jewish people, I feel like their ethnicity is as much a sense of who they are as much as is also a political statement, isn't it? How do you does that make sense to you?
Well, I think first of all we're very divided. It doesn't look that way maybe to the outside person, mm-hmm. but we're hostile constantly with each other, always arguing. Mm-hmm. Maybe not hostile, but mm-hmm. argument is really a big part of the culture. Mm-hmm. That's just what we do. And we're also, as kind of this people that are both kind of particularist and globalist simultaneously, that's one of the divisions. You have the other division between those who are more capitalist versus those who are more communist or socialist, right? That's another huge division. And then those who are more secular versus those who are more religious. So at least those three axes divide Jews, and so we often are fighting with each other quite a bit.
So if you had to point to a common strand, what would that be between all of the factions and all of the different groups?
That we're hyper-educated, that we treat the search for truth as like life's objective, and that we carry on our arguments deeply, and that the idea of argument and interpretation is so central to how we operate. Now, of course, that comes from the Torah.
Okay, but let's talk about since you are a man of science. I'm sure you're aware that it's been established that the Jewish community, and especially a particular segment, are meant to understand that the Ashkenazi Jews.
I'm 3/4 Ashkenazi, yeah.
that when you look at global average IQ, apparently they rank highest in the world. I think they do sit at the top. They occupy the top spot in terms of average IQ. The Ashkenazi Jews, I think, followed by Eastern Asians, Orientals, and then followed by Caucasians, and then other Asians, sort of Middle Eastern, then Asian Pacific, then blacks, and then I think Aboriginals, somewhere there in that spectrum of average IQs, which of course is controversial because, some people aren't happy to view that simply as a scientific question for which there is an answer, but rather they think there's a lot of racism embedded in the very discussion of IQ in the first place. But for the sake of this argument, this conversation, I think you and I are both in agreement that it's a valid scientific premise and a fact that IQ is a thing and that these distributions do exist and are an accurate reflection of reality. So that being said, I think Ashkenazi Jews are highly bright people. And of course, with that intelligence, it ought to come as no surprise that they occupy prestigious positions in fields of science and in the arts, in the business, and many other endeavors. So because you were mentioning that, it's what the Torah teaches, but you can't tell me that there isn't a bit of a genetic or scientific component to this.
So cause versus effect. I mean, definitely the phenomena of different, very high level on average of the Jewish people, that's hard to argue with in terms of the testing. You could say that testing is inappropriate. You can impugn the tests as not measuring all types of intelligence, that maybe it's only measuring certain types.
But I'm sorry, I find that to be the most ridiculous thing because, and I've heard the counter arguments, you see, it's IQ tests are culturally relative. What does it measure? Pattern recognition, abstract thinking. Well, what does that have to do with the African context? How I normally respond is, think of everything, all of the metrics we use to, think of the way we function in the world today in a very information-oriented, scientific, technical world. How else would you measure intelligence except by looking at one's ability to engage in abstract thinking and pattern recognition?
I think you're fair to say that. I just wanted to give fair voice to those that do criticize.
Because if you tell me, certain communities are adept at... Because even when it comes to something like hunting, surely you would have to have the capacity to recognize patterns and to be an efficient hunter, you still have to have some level of intelligence measured by the same metrics.
And one would say the Mossad does.
Yeah, ask what's his name, Adolf Eichmann, was that his name?
Yeah, or even the Netanyahu's brother getting the folks out of Entebbe airport.
That too. An amazing operation. Okay, so it seems to me that the culture is more of an emergent aspect of...
That's the word I think you...
The culture is born out of...
Experience.
The experience which is born out of...
Being chased around the planet for 3,500 years. But facing your firstborn getting killed by pharaohs to... having to run with all whatever you can carry on your back. I got indoctrinated early by my dad taking me to the backyard, looking at the wandering Jew plant. He said, well, this is a metaphor for our people. We lay down roots and then we have to move on somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And he would say, look, son, I hate to say it, but, our life here in America is really good. But it was for the Jews in Europe before everything went to hell.
So why is it that the Jews, in your opinion, why do you think they're unique in their experiences? Because there are a variety of Semitic tribes and communities in the Middle Eastern region. It could be Kurds, it could be Armenians, it could be Arabs, there's so many disparate groups, different groups. Why is it that Jews are the ones who sort of, first of all, they were chased out of their homeland? Was it the Babylonians first and then...
Oh, we went how far back? Before Babylonians, Assyrians, there's been... we've been getting the Egyptians.
Right, so how come, and maybe I don't have all my facts together, but, everyone else has pretty much stayed where they've originated and that's been their home. Why is it that, everyone's always trying to come in to chase the Jews out of their homeland?
Well, if you look at the map, Israel is the only land bridge between Africa and the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the only place that people could actually walk or bring stuff from North Africa to Asia to Europe. Crossroads. Basically crossroads, everybody had to pass through that
So
area.
everyone wanted a piece of it.
Well, I wouldn't say that the area was considered that valuable, right? The Romans and Ottomans just degraded it when they got control over it.
Oh, yeah, and maybe, I don't know if you can answer this question for me, but in the instances where the invading empires have routed the Jews out of the area, like what would they then do with the occupied lands? Would they, I don't know, were there minerals to be extracted?
No, it was a trade route.
That's it.
And it became holy because of, it probably a center of intellect. People passing from Africa and Asia and Europe, sharing experiences and culture, getting exposed to all of that. It must have been a very cosmopolitan environment. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it would have been like Rome versus Parthia, right? So these two major empires, the Jews were kind of the pivot between these two major empires. So kind of being caught in the middle all the time.
But even in antiquity, the Jews were, or members of the community were involved in commerce and trade, and they were merchants in many of the major cities.
Artisans. Yeah.
And artisans in the area. So there's been a long-standing relationship between the Jews and the neighboring communities. I'd like to understand, in your opinion, where do you think this feeling of animosity starts to arise from? Because, presumably, let's say if I were a Jewish person living in a neighboring country and I'm there working my job as an accountant or as a merchant or as a trader, how is it then that I start to attract the ire of my host country?
Well, I'm not sure if they're the ones who are generating the ire. So like most situations, it's usually the most visible, wealthy, powerful adjuncts that irritate people. So if you're like we refer to some Jews as being court Jews, like advisors to the king. And you know the story of Esther, where Mordecai was an advisor to the king of Persia.
As Kanye West would say, Rahm Emanuel, Jared Kushner.
Yeah, so there's this one of the archetypes, aside from the greedy, covetous Jew, or the scholarly, intellectual Jew. There's some sort of merger of those two with the court Jew, who is like a consigliere to the mafia. You're advising
like
the rulers.
Hesh in The Sopranos.
Exactly. So someone who gives advice to whoever is really in charge, and you could
and the Bible has examples of that. Joseph,
exactly, and Mordecai,
and
even Moses himself. Right, he becomes part of the royal family.
Right.
And he's African.
Okay,
right?
so the powerful and affluent in the different communities around the world have seen the value and ingenuity of their Jewish advisors.
And usually Jews have not been allowed to own land anywhere.
In those, like through antiquity, in the ancient times.
Yeah, they were not allowed to own land. So if you're going to survive, you had to figure out how you could make money not owning land.
And I think that makes a very interesting point, because a lot of countries, if you look at sort of the working class, the peasant class, they're very much tied to the land, to the soil.
Exactly.
For them, it's blood and soil. And if, as you're saying, Jews in these countries weren't really given permission to own land, then their attachment to these countries would not be as strong. These countries would simply then be viewed as places of residence rather than places to which they have strong attachment, meaning that would force them to gravitate more inwards towards themselves.
Well, there's an oscillation. There's like a generational oscillation, like 40 years of inward, 40 years of assimilation. And so a lot of the times the Jews bend over backwards to prove that they are the best at being a patriotic part of the country they're living in, even if they can't own land. Like the Jews in Russia would try to be the best novelists.
Do you think that's why Zelensky is he's also overcompensating
Definitely.
He's trying to be such an ultra-nationalist.
Definitely. Well, because I mean,
that it's overkill.
Well, the Ukrainians took part in the Holocaust of the Jews in Europe.
Of course.
I mean, my family got wiped out in the first weeks of the war in Ukraine, in Romania, that whole area. So I think in some ways there's this cycle where Eastern Europeans kind of want their Jews back. They feel almost like they lost a part of their society and culture when the Jews left, and they're starting to realize it. In Germany too, even some Germans are converting to Judaism to fill in the gap. It's weird. It's like, and Spain is now like begging Jews to come back. If you can prove that you were part of the Jews who got kicked out in the Inquisition.
It seems to be something that happens often. Because remember, even Uganda, we did that when our president in 1972 expelled the Asians. Then, in the 90s, the then president and the current president begged for them to return. So I think
people with skills have value.
Right.
it's that simple. So
okay,
like I've been confronting everybody on these arguments going on in America that you and I are going to talk about in more depth, that maybe part of the root of this is that if the Jews finally feel like they're too threatened in America and just leave, what happens?
Why would they feel too threatened, and why would they leave? They seem to control or wield tremendous power over the political structure. Everyone seems to concede that AIPAC, which is a pro-Israel lobby group that lobbies lawmakers on all sides of the aisle in the United States, they're very powerful, perhaps the most powerful and influential lobby group, and that influences for U.S. foreign policy. So they know that they'll always have access to American support, American military aid and arms.
But it's not.
And then
it's not a monopoly, because like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they also have tremendous influence over Congress. And
to the same extent,
they have huge amounts of money.
Yeah, there's that. But in the case of the Israel pro-Israel lobby, they've got several members of Congress and probably even senators who have some connection
from the Jewish view. They've looked historically at the Republicans of the Bush era as being heavily backed by the Arabs. And so my father always, even though he would vote Republican, he feared them because he felt that they were in the pockets of the Arabs because the country was so dependent on oil.
Okay.
And then there's the old WASP money, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Morgans, et cetera, et cetera. None of those are Jews. Mm-hmm. And they're more interested in international, oil industry and international finance connected with it, and the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. So, while Jews may be great scientists and engineers, most likely overrepresented in as engineers and scientists working with Raytheon or Lockheed or whatever, but they don't own those companies.
So, as a American of Jewish descent, what do you make of the seeming, I don't know if I should say animosity towards the majority population in the United States, America? When I see articles written by Jewish authors in publications talking about how whiteness is a cancer, the danger of whiteness, we must eradicate whiteness, the problem of whiteness, and so many disparaging things said about the sort of the majority community population, and seeing, and this is something that you will see being discussed sort of in the more white right-wing circles, who are always quick to say, well, what do you expect? Look at the byline. It's a Jewish author, a Jewish writer with a Jewish editor. And so there's all these so-called attacks on whites. And almost as though there's a need to... first, let me ask you, is that something you see as well? Or
as I mentioned at the outset, there's several dividing lines among Jews. So the global versus the local or particular, the secular versus the religious, and the capitalist versus the socialist. So you're going to tend to read more writings from Jewish intellectuals and academia that are more part of the socialist strand, that are more part of the secular, anti-religious stand. And as a proportion of Jews, that is the majority. It's probably 2/3 are more in that side than the other side.
So if you looked at the Jewish population in any Western country, you're saying approximately 2/3 are likely to lean
towards the secular, globalist, but the other cosmopolitan, but it's changing, right? Like the Democrats used to be able to count on getting 80+% of the Jewish vote like they get with the black vote. This last midterm election, they only got 65% of the Jewish vote. And in Florida, it was only 55%. So there's kind of a waning of Jewish backing for at least the Democratic flavor of globalism, Democratic Party flavor of globalism.
Okay.
Especially as now all this stuff is emerging, they're going, holy shit, we thought secularism and globalism would be great and we could just happily attack religious people and white people and nothing would ever happen, and now they're getting the blowback.
So if some people have pointed to the rise of, what is typically commonly referred to as populism or nativism in many Western countries, the US, Hungary, and elsewhere, where you've got sort of right-wing politicians, look at Italy now and elsewhere, right-wing politicians rising in popularity. France has come close a few times in getting a right-wing
Le Pen or whoever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's a tide that's shifting in that direction, and that following several decades of globalist advocacy by many of the leading thinkers of the world, So, and from what you're saying, that a lot of the discussion on globalism and its value and the need for it and turning the entire world into one giant melting pot seems to be. Would it be fair to say that the intellectual thrust of that argument is majorly coming from the intellectuals from that community?
Well, I mean, Jews are only less than 2% of the U.S. public, and even tinier in Europe. So, I mean, there's not enough Jewish hands to hold pens to write enough articles to be the dominant ones.
But I beg to differ. Wouldn't it just be a matter of being in control or having access to the channels of communication?
Well, I think,
i.e., the mainstream media.
But what we're watching is the collapse of power of mainstream media, right?
And which is why we are seeing them desperately attacking independent voices. It's so funny that.
But isn't it interesting how many Jews are part of those independent voices, like Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager? There's a lot of Jews.
Yeah, those are two.
Well, a lot of the right-wing media, PJ. I mean, I could give you probably 20 different websites that are the leading right-wing populist websites in the U.S. where Jews are. Editors like Breitbart, right?
Yeah.
And Andrew Breitbart's Jewish. What's his name? Pollack. He's the editor-in-chief of Breitbart. He's Jewish. I mean, so there's a lot of Jews in the right-wing media, in the non-mainstream media.
So, but then are you trying to argue that it's a lot more balanced than we'd like to think?
It's becoming more so, and I would argue that we're amidst a Jewish civil war.
So, don't you think, in a way, that would help to diffuse a lot of the tensions that are brewing between? All right, don't you think that will go a long way in trying to solve the problem or the perception of, say, Jews being against the interests of, let's say, conservatives or right-wing people? Because that is kind of where the conversation leans quite often.
I think as the public learns that there is such diversity in the Jewish community, and that there are populist Jews, I think if they realize that would change things, and that's starting to become revealed. Because I mean, you're right. The perception is that Jews are all just globalists, and in reality, the proportion of globalists among Jews is shrinking rapidly.
We know that the Jews that live within Israel are very pro-Israel. They're very ethno-state.
They're populists. They are populists.
There's a video that went viral last week showing ill treatment of African immigrants and refugees in Israel, where people are marching in the streets telling them to get out and to go back to their countries. Have you seen that video?
Yeah, it's actually from 2009. But
okay.
Yeah, but those incidents have happened. You can't pretend that they haven't.
Okay, and you just by listening to what the protesters are saying, this is our country, this is our land, we don't want it to change. Now, which very much echoes, the Ku Klux Klan in the States. Almost.
Yeah, but this is their fringe. I mean, if you're in Israel today, I mean, first of all, there's like 250,000 Ethiopian Jews in Israel. They're heavily respected. They're winning, the whatever entertainment contests, and they're holding positions in the military and, Supreme Court justices. And so, I mean, there are racist Jews, of course. There's racists everywhere.
And
that's not. I don't think that's defining the situation there. I think a lot of it is like I went to Israel with my Ugandan girlfriend at the time in 2019, and we were not greeted with what I would have liked.
Really?
Well, they treat anybody who's not coming from a first world country. They put you in a pile to be interrogated, regardless where
you're viewed with more suspicion.
Well, because they're worried about people staying and becoming wards of the state. So I waved down one of the security guards at the airport with my lousy Hebrew, and he said, okay, how about this? I'll go interrogate you instead of me interrogating your Ugandan woman. And so he brought me into a room, and he said, look, here's the thing. You might just be a fool, and you got this young woman who's just using you to get to Israel, and she's going to abandon you, and you'll go back to wherever you came from without her, and we're stuck with her. So here's the deal. If you're willing to vouch for her, and if she stays, you will never be able to return to Israel again. And so I said, she's not going to stay. I'll make that gamble. But that's their big concern. The same as just anybody coming from a poor country.
Yeah. Wait, but is that what it is? Is it a more welfare issue, or is it an issue of
it's money. It's welfare.
Race preservation?
No, because Jews are multiracial, right? There's Jews of every color, and they're really proud of it. They love to show off black Jews. Oh my God, it's one of the things that every Jewish family would love to show off. They had a black Jew in it,
really,
or a Latino Jew. Oh hell yeah!
Do you think there are differences between the specific different groups, communities within?
Well, they become intermixed, right? The Mizrahi, those that were from Arab and Iranian background, they've become increasingly intermarried with the Ashkenazi in Israel. So like my cousin in Israel, he's married to a Mizrahi, and he's Ashkenazi. And so that integration and integration with the Ethiopians, that's all happening. Does it need to be better? Hell yeah. Is it, are there no problems, no racial problems in Israel? That would be a lie. But is it some hellhole? No. The Muslims and Christian Arabs who are Israeli citizens have the same rights of everybody else. It comes down to religion. It's not about race, it's religion. And I think that hasn't been talked about openly enough.
What do you make of some Black Americans, African Americans, saying that they are Jewish? Basketball player Kyrie Irving has been articulating that idea. He got in trouble for sharing a link to a book that sort of espouses that claim. And he was asked why he's being anti-Semitic, and he said, how can I be anti-Semitic? I can't be, because did he say he's Jewish? Or Kanye has said that, but in similar vein. So there's a growing proportion of blacks in America who think of themselves as Jewish. What sense do you make of that?
I think they are really searching for a value system to base the community upon, so that the cannibalism of Black American society comes to an end, because people are just killing each other and eating each other. And that's what...
You don't think there's any historical basis for this? Or I haven't examined the argument myself.
That's a flimsy argument, but I understand their need. They are desperate to find a code of ethics to carry on. Kanye West was explicit about that, why he's jealous of Jewish people, right? I think that was a much more interesting rant than any of his others.
I think, and the problem of dealing with Kanye West is that he kind of just engages in these long streams of consciousness.
Oh, he's just trying to get attention, yeah.
And so, depending on what soundbite you hear, you'll get different perspectives on what he thinks, right?
Well, we know him and Candace Owens were heavily driven by the abortion issue, right? And that to them was just this horrifying thing that the globalists or whoever have been pushing abortion into the black community, making it easily available. And it's hard to deny that Jews, again, are overrepresented as social workers and et cetera, as feminist activists. So
and that sort of, it feeds the narrative.
I think so. And then, this abortion, movement, I don't know what to call it, but, it, in a way, it's enabling couples that don't have financial capacity to get out of the consequences. And it's distracting from the real issue that putting the least skilled people in rich countries in competition with cheap labor in the third world, whether imported or offshored, is hurting the least skilled Americans or Europeans, right? Whether they're white, black, or Latino.
And I think those grievances have only increased over time. And because the perception is, because you spoke of overrepresentation, and not just in social work or in feminist activism, but when you look at the various areas of life in which black Americans are feeling oppressed, whether it be the economics or the entertainment industry, football, music industry.
I was going to say football? No. Basketball? It kind of looks like blacks control
media. I think they find it easy to scapegoat the Jewish community because they see an overrepresentation of that minority in the positions of power that influence and control these institutions.
Maybe it's not an irony. Maybe it's just the dialectic that a lot of Jews helped black entertainers rise up. And now maybe it's a frustration on both sides that they don't need each other.
I think the challenge is, of course, that the black community, I think, benefited greatly from the availability to harness their musical talents and to have successful careers. But then at the same time, on the back end, they found themselves being really squeezed by what they perceived to be some very unfair practices.
Well, they've outgrown the relationship. So, at one point, the Jews were helping blacks break the color barrier, whether it was, getting, Jackie Robinson in baseball, right? Jews were the ones that were pushing him to be able to break the color barrier in baseball. And in music, so many Jewish producers were helping black artists get heard. So that describes the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Now, mega stars like Kanye West, with the internet and everything else, they don't need
the middleman.
They don't need the middleman. They don't need to be introduced, to be blessed, to be coached. They know what they're doing. And so they've just outgrown the relationship.
So when Kanye West speaks of a Jewish media that's out to get him, how do you process that information? What do you make of it?
I think he's trying to create his own aura of power and strength, that he's not afraid, that nobody can shut him up or stop him. So that's why he's going to ever greater
Or do you think he knows
offend.
that they can and they will, but maybe he just wants to be the poster child of...
He's way outgrown. And partly he wanted to cancel his agreements. That's what Candace Owen even acknowledged, that months before this blow-up, he wanted to end all these relationships with Adidas and everybody else because he thinks he can do better on his own. So he got them to be stupid enough to cancel their own deals. So I think this is a strategic move on his part. And he can consolidate himself as someone who had the balls.
No, but he's a lot... I think they're a lot smarter than he may have realized because, yes, the contracts may have been terminated, but apparently they are able to freeze his accounts on the basis that he has money owed to them or something along those lines.
Well, obviously there's a conflict.
Because I think I saw something like how Adidas are claiming a very significant portion of his savings in one of the banks as expenses that they incurred that somehow need to be refunded or something like that. So they found different ways of, sticking their hands into his money.
Sure, but he'll come out
living up to the stereotype that.
But he'll come out of this much better off than R. Kelly. I mean, R. Kelly has just been completely destroyed. That's not going to happen to Kanye at all.
Wait, you think even after his more recent remarks, and I don't know if you heard his more recent remarks, he's been doing a tour of independent media platforms and he's on shows. And just a few days ago, he was on the Alex Jones show, InfoWars. And Alex Jones, essentially, as opposed to other people that try to stop him from speaking, he just let him go with it, run with it. And Kanye West said some very interesting things. So I'm just going to play the first clip that we have of some of the ranting he did in the Alex Jones video. So let's go to Kanye, the first video.
That's right. You're not Hitler. You're not a Nazi. You don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well, I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
I don't think Hitler was a good guy. I get the Hugo Boss uniforms, amazing. But I mean, just because you're in love with the design, you're a designer. Can we just kind of say like you like the uniforms, but that's about it?
No, there's a lot of things that I love about Hitler. A lot of things.
Shocking?
No. I mean, because I just assume Kanye is an attention whore. And what better way to get attention than by attacking the sacred cow?
Wait, so your feelings weren't hurt by those remarks? Because I've been seeing some people express like visceral pain on just hearing someone dare to utter those things, even if he's just trolling, even if he's saying it.
I grew up at a time when I had to actually physically fight with Nazis in the 70s and Klansmen. So sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if people like Hitler, that's their prerogative. It doesn't hurt me. I mean, my family was exterminated by the Nazis, but it wasn't just Hitler. Mm-hmm. It's average people who took part in it.
Okay. Now, obviously, that's if we take his words at face value, he seems to be espousing love for what a lot of people consider to be an evil man. Let's play the second video to see if we can extract any further nuance from what he's trying to say. So let's go to the second video.
Eyeballs out. All I'm telling you is that just because you hate the globalists and what they're doing, and I get it. Klaus Schwab's grandfather was a Nazi. I think there's Nazis above the ADL.
Yeah, but Nazis are like kind of cool.
Because you like their uniforms.
No, these are people. Everyone's a people. I love all people.
So you love the Zionists?
I love this. I said that earlier in the show.
All right. You have any comments on Hitler?
I have to agree with Ye.
Who did Ye say he hated? Ye didn't say he hated anybody. Why isn't anybody listening to him? He said, I love this person. I love the people who are trying to take away my children. I love this person. He never said.
But I don't think listen, I'm just getting it totally clear. But I think
Alex,
Stalin.
You did the same thing. You did the same thing.
Stalin is horrible. Hitler is horrible. Mao is horrible.
No. I love all of those.
You love Mao Zedong?
Absolutely. Mao brought.
Well, clarify that. You're saying you're like Christ-like. You love everybody.
Yeah.
No matter. You love Jim Jones. You love Jeffrey Dahmer.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's clarify.
So yeah, I don't know if he's trying to go for the hippie love, Jesus love kind of thing where it's all about extending love to everyone, good and evil, and not being judgmental. It sounds like that's what he's going for. I don't know. Are you willing to grant? Do you think you can grant him that, or do you think he's just endorsing the worst form of evil in the world by even suggesting anything positive about Hitler?
Well, I know he loved his dogs. He was an animal lover. A lot of the founding Nazis were animal rights people. Mm-hmm. I'm sure people are rarely 100% anything. So does it bother me? Am I scared by it? Obviously I'm here in Uganda, so I'm far away, but my family still is in LA.
So when you hear statements like his, do you think he's sort of giving justification to those who might want to do harm to Jews?
Well, yeah, but they're going to look for justification anywhere they can, whether it's him saying it or somebody else. There are, there's the whole battle of whether it's right-wing anti-Semitism or left-wing anti-Semitism. First of all, I don't even like the word anti-Semitism. I think the word is just misused. I think we should talk about Judeophobia. And because look at me with my big nose. Don't I look just like any other Arab, Lebanese guy?
Yeah, because aren't Arabs Semites too?
Yeah. So that's why I say it's about Judeophobia. So this is about Jewishness, Judea, where the Jews came from. And so, from the Nazi perspective, they didn't want to have Semitic blood, whether it was Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. And over time, that has had an impact, long before the Nazis. Pogroms and discrimination. Jews that looked more Arab probably ended up not doing so well. And those that looked more
European,
they probably were not sent to the gas chambers in as high a proportion because they were able to pass, like a light-skinned black person.
Do you think some people have tried to discuss the fact about, obviously because everyone's freaking out over Kanye's seeming admiration of the Nazis. He said the Nazis were the cool guys, and I think there's places where he explained that they created highways and microphones and things like this. Obviously, the Nazis were. Would you agree with the contention that they did make several positive technological contributions to the world that we still benefit from today?
Well, German industry generally has been incredibly powerful for centuries.
Because
long before the Nazis existed.
I'm meant to understand that, for example, NASA would not have come into existence without Nazi scientists.
Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist, was brought to the U.S. After World War II. But of course, most of the scientists were Jewish. Einstein and Oppenheimer.
It was called Operation Paperclip.
That was for post-war.
Where post-war, after the war, they went sweeping through Germany to see what scientists they could find that would be willing to work for them.
Well, now we're getting at the core issue, which is intellectual capital, human capital. So this is why Jews are valuable, and there's Germans who are not Jewish who are also valuable. Just Jews have a higher proportion that are very valuable intellectually. So every country wants to get the top minds. Right? I mean, you'd be foolish not to.
Exactly. So what about
it's a resource more important than gold. So like right now when the rich world is brain draining Africa all the time of its smartest people,
America brain drained the smartest Europeans.
Exactly.
In the 40s.
And now it brain drains Africa, South America, Asia. So the brain drain is critical to imperialist success. I would argue America is probably having sleepless nights wondering if this anti-Jewish thing gains momentum, what proportion of Jews are just going to leave the U.S. And if they left in mass, you could very well have a situation where Israel has the number 3 GDP on the planet.
Now, would that be a bad thing, in your opinion?
No, I think it'd be great for Africa. To have more Jews leave America, come to Africa.
Obviously, they would be leaving if they were to leave for a wrong reason, an unfortunate reason. But I'm just saying that the consequence of that might be something that ends up benefiting the state of Israel. That is, if they choose to travel to Israel, because they could very well decide to come to Africa.
I hope so. I hope
as you have.
Yeah. I'm encouraging. Look, if your Hebrew isn't so good.
But wait. The cycle might repeat itself because you're in Uganda. In the 1970s, I mentioned earlier, our president at the time expelled the Asians because there was a concern that Asians were in too much control of the economy. And if Jews were to move here, and which, by the way, they were supposed to in the 40s, were they not supposed to be given land
1910s.
1910s.
Or early British, on, it was on the list as one of the choices.
Imagine that.
So imagine in Karamoja. Actually, that's where they were going to put them.
Really?
That was the place.
So imagine if that had happened.
All of our choices were like that, like Siberia, Alaska, Karamoja. They were not hospitable places.
Well, it may not have been a bad idea with all the gold in Karamoja.
Well, yeah, but
but I'm saying,
could we have such a situation where we get 500,000 Jews moving to Uganda or Africa, and it gets to the point where somehow...
Because with their ingenuity and intelligence and their
hopefully it would make the economy
expertise,
grow and we'd have jobs for everybody.
but then it would probably and predictably lead to a concentration of the wealth and resources within particular communities, which will unfortunately end up fostering those grievances.
Well, eventually. But I mean, at first it would just grow the pie. So at first it grows the pie before it concentrates it. So I like
to think of here's what I think about. If you are a minority community living in a country, I feel like there's a lot to be gained by actively engaging in outreach efforts.
Well, my whole life here in Uganda, as you know, has almost nothing to do with white people or Jewish people, right? My entire existence here is dominated by black folks. Every person that matters to me here is black.
I would say actually white people in Uganda, I'll just speak of Uganda because it's where we are. There isn't so much of a sense of resentment towards white people. There seems to be a more positive relationship. There's a heck of a lot of interracial marriage and relationships between black men, African men, white women, and vice versa. So there's a lot more assimilation. Whereas, let's say, with the Asian community, it's not as bad as it was in the 70s, but you still do hear disparaging comments being made by both sides about each other.
Yes.
There's a lot of distrust between the communities, and the Asian community, I would say, are still kind of they do. I feel like they're still kind of discriminatory, and they still kind of segregate themselves more. They sort of have their own events, their own activities. They don't, and certainly they don't allow any mixing, or at least it's heavily discouraged. Especially for their women.
Well, certainly from my perspective, coming from the Jewish community of North America, I've been getting admonished by my elders since I was a kid about how we were assimilating into America. Mm-hmm. And like my fellow Hebrew school classmates as a kid, not one of us, not a single Jewish boy married a Jewish woman. Not one.
The demand for Jewish girls must be very high. They must be in such high demand.
Well, yes and no. I think also they're demanding too, and they have options. So they're out marrying. They're marrying
because you're already a minority. There's not that many of you in the vicinity, meaning that among the few that are there, that there's a high.
Well, Jewish guys should be in demand too, but I think in general we've gone for an outward orientation for the last 50 years or so.
Yeah,
where we're the most out-married group in the U.S. So the amount of Jews who've married Asians, blacks, Latinos is just huge. So now Jews of color in the U.S., I think there's about 1 million of them.
Wow, and I wonder what that's going to lead to. I do see a few of them quite active in the activism space.
No, they are. No, I mean, we even have tragic examples like Jussie Smollett.
Yes.
But then we have more positive stories like Lisa Bonet or Lenny Kravitz. Mm-hmm. But that don't have to fake hate crimes to get attention. But so there's a lot of people desperate for attention. Clearly, we're in this attention economy, and so people are able to monetize attention by being as outrageous as they can be, whether that's Kanye West or whoever. So my view, I mean, if Jews were to come to Uganda, I would tend to think they'd intermarry like I have done and become part of the fabric.
The men maybe. I don't know. What about the women?
The Jewish women I knew in Canada and the US had African boyfriends and Latino boyfriends, and so I think everybody's mixing and matching.
All right, but do you see that happening anytime soon? Are you hearing rumblings of a mass migration?
Well, I'm suddenly getting a lot of phone calls from Jewish friends in North America wanting to get serious about setting up businesses here with me. So this has just happened in the last 2-3 months. So I don't know, something. I mean, I'm far away, but when I look on Twitter, which I don't like to participate in there because it's just too hostile all the time.
And that's another thing. Do you think these concerns end up just being over amplified and inflated in significance?
I think we're in a time of self-dramatization.
Because what you see on social media is quite different from what you encounter on the streets, it would seem. Where
exactly. Where you'll have somebody who thinks that they're a hotshot or a slay queen on social media, and then you see them in real life and they're nothing.
Yeah, so exactly. So social media amplifies sort of people's worst sentiments and prejudices. But in real life, you may find that a lot of people sort of temper those down. And, you know, for a Jewish person in America feeling like he or she might be in danger because they're seeing this kind of rhetoric, I don't know. My instinct is to say, maybe you shouldn't be so scared. In fact, blame the media for making you so scared.
Well, I would agree with that generally. However, the universities seem to be the sharp end of the stick there. So the Jews in academia are definitely feeling like that they're getting kicked out.
But isn't it their job to be professional agitators and professional grievance peddlers, always looking for problems everywhere and inflating them, magnifying them?
Some yes, some no. I think what I've been observing on Twitter is just you have these like Jewish guys and women who are professors at universities that seem like they're just becoming politicized. Mm-hmm. That they were apolitical before, and now they're discovering that there's this antipathy. And they're freaking out because they've never had to face it. Mm-hmm. And they're getting excluded from committees. Their quotas are being informally erected. I mean, all this...
Really?
Well, the diversity stuff, right? So the diversity stuff doesn't include Jews. So because they're not included, the expansion of every other minority is going to come at the expense of Jews.
Well, since they seem to be the ones that are the largest proponents of such policies...
well, they're not the identical people. They may be both Jews, but you have a Jew who's promoting the diversity stuff, and then another Jew becoming the victim of it. So it's not the same person.
Wait, so are you saying this could be a self-correcting thing where essentially the problem solves itself because the policies they advocate for will end up sort of...
Well, again, the they is not... I mean,
there we go. The they.
The they.
They. Who is they?
Who is the they? So you got some big mouth pushing for a policy, and another fraction of the they paying the price. So it's not the same person. It's and it could actually be the instigator is gaining attention.
Goodness, it's so very confusing. And do you think there is some benefit to Kanye West at least creating conversation about this, even if one were to dislike what he's saying? Is it possible to appreciate the fact that it has stirred up strong debate?
Yeah, well, my interaction with Twitter has been to counsel the Jews who are inflamed to grow a pair, and I go, if you're scared, learn Krav Maga, or move to Israel. Lock and load, be ready to defend yourself and blow somebody's head off. So if you're that scared, get armed. My mother's armed.
But
my sisters are armed.
And
they practice at the shooting range, and they're incredibly good shots. Uh-oh. So I tell Jews who feel scared, arm up, lock and load, learn Krav Maga, move to Israel, move to Africa or India.
But are they really scared, and that's another thing. It could be because
it's feigning
like performative outrage is a tool of manipulation.
Well, that's why I tell them, if you're really scared, do something about it.
And since they're not doing something about it, they're probably not as scared.
That's how I confront them. If you're truly scared, get ready for combat, and if not, chill. And it's like, and if you're doing this just to get attention, if you're lonely and tired, which many people are, the lockdowns have worn people out and scared people about the future financially and every other way. Mm-hmm. I think every ethnic group is having an identity crisis. And so if you can manufacture a monster that's 50 feet tall, that
it gives you a sense of purpose.
Gives you purpose.
Something to fight.
And a group to unite with, that, to fight the monster. So I think from people dealing with intense loneliness and exhaustion, I think that's where a lot of these monsters are coming.
So what's the solution? For us to just get out more and hang out with the real people?
Yeah, get out.
Get off social media.
Get off social media. Go for a walk. Have dinner with your neighbors. I tell Jewish people, look, if you're scared about blacks who hate Jews, invite them over for Shabbat dinner. invite them into your homes and just talk. Even if you yell and scream at each other, that's progress. At least you didn't knife each other. So I'm not scared of people yelling at each other. And if people have stereotypes, let them air it out.
And I guess my final question on this topic would be the stereotypes. Obviously, as people do point out, the concentration of this minority within many institutions of prominence and influence in entertainment and finance and so forth, which seems to be, verifiably true. Do you think Jon Stewart was trying to argue that just because that may be the case, it does not mean there are nefarious undertones to it or motives behind it, some sort of conspiracy for them to use that power to oppress others? So is it possible to acknowledge both things, that, yep, that concentration of power and influence does exist, but it doesn't automatically mean that it's nefarious? Is that something that is easy to convince people of?
Well, first of all, I would argue that to whatever extent Jews do have, disproportional representation in institutions that have power, those institutions themselves are disintegrating. So that's
whether it's the media
or academia. Look how worthless a university degree is these days. Why would you spend $200,000 to get a piece of paper that somebody can just attend the classes online and learn the same stuff?
Right.
I went to Harvard and Stanford, but somebody else can take the same classes I took, get the same education, and they don't have to put their whole family into debt to get this piece of paper. So we're in a situation where suddenly the gatekeeping is falling apart. So maybe that's giving people inspiration to fight harder against those that they thought who were in charge. But those who are in charge are finding out they're not in charge either. And to whatever extent they may have had malevolent, megalomaniac, egomaniac power fixations, they're getting eaten by their revolutions that they've started. So, they've set in motion anger and processes that end up consuming them.
And so do you think then that sort of solves the problem, that it's essentially just a cycle of history, that it will reach the apex, and then eventually with these new innovations and just the tide of history, it all kind of winds down and there's a semblance of balance restored, do you think?
Well, we're talking in the abstract, right?
Yeah.
In the abstract, yes. Sure, even the extermination of all the Jews of Europe intensified Jewish solidarity, and Israel was already in formation, and now it's even more determined. And so we've recovered. We've recovered from Auschwitz as a people. Now, the family members of mine that were killed, they're not coming back. So again, the they eventually comes down to real individuals, just like the cycles of history. We could say the pendulum will swing. Jews will leave U.S. and U.K. and distribute themselves across the planet.
I don't know, because everyone thought cryptocurrencies would be the great equalizer, right? Removing the control from the the Federal Reserve and the other entities.
I wanted to believe that, but
it kind of, it's more of the same, it seems.
Well, I've been following the genesis of crypto since the 90s. There's a great book, actually, it's fun fiction, but Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, and it's this whole plot to create a cryptocurrency that was going to be gold backed and based on reserves hidden in the Philippines somewhere. Anyway, it was quite but when they discussed all of these aspects of crypto, I started realizing you don't escape fiat.
You don't. At some point, it will always revert to that, because even now we're seeing many of the people involved in the cryptocurrencies, those that run the exchanges, advocating for government oversight and government control.
Because they can't control the monster they created.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of Frankensteins.
FTX
is another Frankenstein. So that's a lot of the and as a technologist, I've created a lot of technologies that I worried about. Like when I did the genome, I worried about it. I brought my whole company to see the movie Gattaca. If you ever heard of the movie Gattaca, it's from the 90s, Uma Thurman, Ethan Hawke. It portrays the society that's a genetic caste system. Mm-hmm. And I brought the CEO of the largest insurance company in the U.S. to sit with me, and we watched the movie together with my whole company. Because I told everybody, look, what we're building is enormously powerful. We're creating biofire with genetic, capabilities. So, I use the Oppenheimer statement about the nuclear bomb. He's like, with great power comes great responsibility. And so I think we have to face up to that these technological genies that we unleash have consequences far beyond our imagination. I mean, sometimes it's, it's not the horrible thing that we thought, but it's a different horrible thing. Mm-hmm. And what can you do? I mean, we're not God. We can't, we don't know what to expect. I mean,
I don't know. I think everything's just going to stay the same. It'll just look different, but I think the same sort of social order, economic order will prevail. I think it'll just be, as some people would say, same script, different cast.
Well, humanity is what we are. I mean, we have our human nature, and that's not going to fundamentally change. But geography, centers of power, technological. Look, the solar revolution is going to make Middle Eastern and Russian fossil fuels irrelevant, and that's happening super quickly. How does that change the equation, even on this Jewish-Muslim conflict, when Muslim natural resources aren't worth anything? So what will the world look like in 10 or 20 years? I mean, I feel like Putin had to accelerate his war knowing that the solar hydrogen revolution was going to make his energy irrelevant within a decade or so.
Yeah, and also if we're not reliant upon fossil fuels, then that marks the end of the U.S. dollar. Also,
well, it also marks the rise of the global sun belt.
Africa!
You got it. That's why I'm here. So I think we're looking at a solar future.
Wakanda is coming, baby.
It's exactly, and it's decentralized because you cannot monopolize the sun.
It depends. Have you watched The Matrix?
Yeah, well, they had to blow up everything to wipe out the sun coming in, right? They had to create enough smoke so that the sun can So yeah, that's
it might be possible to block sunlight from reaching certain parts of the world.
I don't know if you could make it prevent some parts. Actually, though, they did do a model. A science paper was recently published in the last 2 months, 3 months.
And I think Gates is financing some of that stuff.
Well, no, he's trying purposely to put stuff up there to darken the skies.
Yes, to reduce global warming.
But this paper concerned that if there's nuclear war, how much soot will be in the sky and how much of the world will starve to death. And their modeling of winds and climate and whatnot showed that basically Wakanda will be the only place that survives. We'll be the only place with food. DRC, Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, the whole rest of the world will not have enough sunlight to grow enough food. We'll be the only place that can, which is really interesting. Because I remember when they modeled this in the 80s, because I read because I was, as I mentioned, I've studied under Condoleezza Rice and all these other people that were planning for World War. Mm-hmm. And so the question was, once they've blown up the world, and they've created a nuclear winter, how long would it take for civilization to be able to be rebuilt? So back in the 80s, they thought that humanity would be reduced to the 1500s or 1600s level of existence, but that within a 25-year period, I was amazed how quickly that they could rebuild the world to the 1980s level. So it's morose, it's horrendous that they can casually talk about, billions of people being wiped off the earth and starving to death and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, they were planning for World War back in the 80s at the height of the Cold War. And now, when I saw that paper again, it's like, well, look, at least they chose the right place to live.
Speaking of world wars, some might say we're already in a world war. Would you agree? This whole Ukraine thing?
Yeah, I think so. And I think,
think this is World War III yet?
Well, I mean, names. How do we name a war? I mean, you could have said the war in DRC in the 90s was a world war. It certainly was an African world war. Did the Europeans feel it? No.
That's another thing. Yeah, why is it called a world war just because it's European countries?
You got it. That's so
it's like World Series baseball, yet it's just
America,
Canada,
and
and Mexico.
Not even Mexico.
Oh, really? Just America and
Mexican
Canada.
athletes, or Dominican athletes, Cuban athletes. No, but it's U.S. and Canada only.
And it's the World Series.
And it's the World Series. And yet Japan's got a huge,
baseball
league,
Yeah.
And so, no. So, yeah, World War. I mean, like, if they couldn't call, what went on in, Central East Africa in the 90s and early 2000s a world war, and yet, what was it, like 11 armies?
Right.
I mean, that's not a world war.
So you're right. It's just names and labels.
It's just, yeah. So at what point does it tip over into something where a giant percentage of the world population is killed by war? I don't know.
Very scary. Well, I want to thank you so much, Joel Bellenson, for being my guest today on this special edition of the Fatboy Show. Always awesome to have you with us here to have these conversations.
My pleasure. It's rare that we can discuss these types of things without people freaking out.
Yeah. So in case you missed part one of the interview, I'm just going to post the link to part one where we discussed, Joel's background. He tells us about where he's from and what he studied. And you'd be shocked at the things he's done. Even had a conversation with Michael Jackson, he told us.
Well, just a few seconds.
For a few seconds.
Just a few seconds.
But the details of that story you can find in part one of this conversation. I'll just put the link in the description of this video. So please subscribe, share the video, hit the notification to get more video, to be notified the next time we post videos. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and thank you, Joe, for being here.
Well, thank you, James, for being you and having me here. And
I got to get you back for more of these conversations.
It's fun. This is fun. I mean, this is obviously
excellent
topics that make people want to go crazy.
I would agree. Awesome. Yay.
Yay.